Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ethan Gibbs from the Channel 27 News. This evening, we will be having a special edition on terrorism around the world. There recently have been a string of terrorist attacks around the world. We will be visiting the regions that have had the most impactful attacks, which include Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. First, we will be visiting Mr. Williams, who's in Europe right now with European terrorism expert Mr. Declan Donnelly. Hello, Declan. What's going on over there right now?
Thanks, Ethan. We're here in the home of Mr. Donnelly, expert in European terrorism.
I'm glad you're here.
Now on to the questions. What is the most prominent terrorist group in Europe?
ISIS is the most prominent terror group. They were behind the recent Paris and Brussels attacks in which over 150 Belgians were killed.
I see, but why is ISIS attacking Europe?
ISIS is an Islamic terror group, and they practice religious terrorism. They believe all non-Muslims are heretics and that they should be punished. Europe is a myriad of different religions, and that might show why ISIS is attacking Europe. ISIS uses strict interpretations of the Quran to justify their actions, and they believe themselves to be messengers of Allah.
Okay, that makes sense, but why is Europe such a hotbed for terrorism?
ISIS sees Europe as an excellent recruiting ground for themselves, and over 4,000 young Europeans have gone to join ISIS, according to Time magazine. These men and women are mostly young, single adults, and they're disillusioned with life at home. Usually they are contacted by terror groups over the internet who lure them to the Middle East.
Frightening, but what steps can Europe take to stop all this recruiting by ISIS?
European governments will take multiple steps to stifle terrorism. European governments could enforce stricter background checks at the border, as well as travel advisories to the Middle East. I believe temporary closing borders to all commercial travel would help stifle terrorism.
Sounds good. Thanks for your time. Now back to the studio with coverage over terrorism in Asia.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Now we will be visiting Mr. Michael Jacks, who is in Asia with another expert on terrorism. What's going on over there, Mr. Jacks?
Thanks, Ethan. I'm here with Asia terrorism expert David Ers. David, what are the major terrorist organizations in this region?
Well, the most recent string of terrorist attacks have been by a group called Jima Islami. They have been terrorizing this region with many attacks. There are other groups such as MILF and different rebel groups.
Interesting. What were the most recent attacks by these groups?
The most recent attack was the beheading of a capture technician named Gan Ted Fen. He was killed by a group of rebels who have claimed allegiance with ISIS.
Horrific. You just mentioned ISIS. Is ISIS involved in any of these attacks so far?
No, ISIS has generally not targeted Asia whatsoever. They are mostly focused on destroying the West and haven't paid Asia much attention.
How are the terrorists doing so much damage? Is there anything that can be done to stop them?
Well, Michael, the terrorists are using cheap, easily obtainable, military-grade weapons. They are using these weapons to release havoc on civilians and fight authorities. So far, governments are having a hard time countering these attacks because they are so unpredictable and these weapons are so easy to get. However, some countries like the Philippines are creating anti-terrorism forces that are being deployed constantly and have overall been very effective.
Truly amazing. Well, thank you, David, for your time.
No problem. It was a pleasure being here.
Well, folks, you heard it first here. Now back to you, Ethan.
Alright, thanks, Michael. Now listen to Joseph, who's in the Middle East.
Hello, reporting here Joseph Times with David Johnson and John Davidson.
Good to be here.
I'll be discussing the topic over the power and history of terrorism in one of the most dangerous regions in the world, where terrorism and hate for Western foreign countries thrive through the desert and villages of the Middle East. Currently in the Middle East, the most active terrorist group is ISIS, or ISIL, which stands for Islamic State of Syria and Iraq. ISIS is currently the richest terrorist group in the world. It's making an average of $2 billion annually. Some analysts estimate to $3 billion.
I strongly believe that ISIS has to be stopped. But first off, where are they getting all this money to afford all these weapons, plane tickets, bomb parts, and RPGs?
Well, I think it has to do with the jihadist regime taking over local land and villages and forcing them to pay unfair taxes.
But still, being city robbers wouldn't be enough to afford all these weapons and supplies.
Joseph, can you go into more detail and describe how ISIS financial can fund all this?
Sure, ISIS has become stronger in the Iraqi region and in the Syrian region, where oil production thrives in most of the world. ISIS has been able to take over Syrian and Iraqi territory, which also means they have control over the oil reserves that are in Iraq and Syria. When they have control over these oil reserves, they produce up to 1,000 oil barrels, which can be sold up to $40 per barrel, which is about $1.2 million a day. In Iraq, it's $2 million a day. By keeping this constant rate of exporting oil, ISIS is making about $97 million monthly which with this kind of money, they're able to buy huge mass weapons that can cause great destruction.
Other than ISIS, what other terrorist groups have been active for the past 10 to 20 years?
I'm glad you asked. Terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and Hamas and the Taliban have seemed to be other active terrorist groups within the Middle Eastern region. These organizations use similar battle tactics, including suicide bombing or car truck bombs and combat strategies involving the ones who carry out the missions.
Joseph, could you give us a few examples of these attacks regarding the fact of when they occurred?
Sure. In 1996, Al-Qaeda blew up 2 U.S. embassies, one in Nairobi, Kenya, and the other in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Over 2,000 were injured and over 200 died. From my perspective, it seems like a warning to the U.S. from Al-Qaeda that they were hinting what was coming next.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the people that planned these attacks are the same masterminds of 9/11, which is Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri. This happened 20 years ago. I'm sure Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups within the Middle Eastern region will return to being active sometime in the future.
That's all of our coverage for tonight. Thank you for joining us, and have a good evening.
Well, that's all our coverage tonight, folks. Thanks for tuning in.
I can't even get my arm. Look at this.
You're running your fingers through my curl. Yeah, I know. Goat's like right here on you.
Oh, let me, why
Your arms are longer.
Dude, this shirt's so weird. There's not even a button on this one.
Yeah, there is.
Is that-
Yeah, there is.
Oh, no, not here. It's like sewed shut. Oh my god. I can't even pull the sleeve back.
Yeah. You're stuck in there, so get comfortable.
I can't believe. Why would?
I can't believe you've done this.
Okay. Okay.
She says, what are you guys gonna listen to? She says that. Yes, she does. And then Siobhan will be like, nah, I'll rock. And then you're like, I don't care, whatever.
I don't care.
You're running your fingers through my curls. Okay, Times, hurry up, dude.
Thanks, Ethan. I'm here now with Asia terrorism expert David Ers. David, what are the major terrorists?
Hey, can you hand me a